relationships, and curious conversations. I'm Mandy Pallock, and I'm here with the one and only Dr. Jonathan Rogers. Welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Well, thanks for having me, Mandy.
Yeah.
It's really good to be here.
Dr. Rogers is the author of family favorites such as The Bark of the Bog Owl and the Wilderking Trilogy and The Terrible Speed of Mercy, which is a spiritual biography on Flannery O'Connor and The World According to Narnia. He's the visionary heart and brain behind The Habit, which is a community for writers, and he's the host of The Habit podcast. And Dr. Rogers, when I think of you, I think of someone who's endlessly creative and persistently curious. You have actually filled our home with wonder as we've enjoyed your books like The Bark of the Bog Owl and The Way of the Wilderking, and your book series was instrumental in giving one of my kids a love for reading and another for fostering a sense of wonder and imagination. And you introduced me to the gut punch of Flannery O'Connor short stories and the
Great.
surprising hope infused without. So really, the story is your natural habitat. And we'd like to learn from you as you share about curiosity and relationships through stories.
Well, great. I'd love to talk about it.
Yay. So most listeners to this conversation series, they're mentors involved in life-to-life ministry and everyday conversations. And we're here to learn from you on ways to build those and to have curious conversations with those that God brings into our lives. So as a first question, in your writing and your life and what you do, what does hosting curious conversations look like for you?
Well, I mean, we can start with the obvious, right? Every Monday, I release an episode of the Habit podcast, and the subtitle is Conversations with Writers About Writing. And so that's, I think one of the big appeals of that podcast, I hope, is that they're actual conversations, right? I often send some questions, but I always frame it as we're going to follow this conversation where it goes. It's likely to go in some of these directions because I'm interested in this, but we're not just going to march down a list of questions because, we don't really, until we wade into a conversation, we don't really know what we think. We don't know. We have a good idea of what we think about something, but to go into a conversation without a very strict agenda really opens the opportunity for wisdom that you didn't know you had, or wisdom that the other person didn't know they had, wisdom that you can benefit from. And so, you have a sense of how this works. You've got to have some kind of plan, but you have to be, in the kind of these more formal situations, conversations, and also many in-person conversations. You come in with a plan, but it's really important to not cling too closely to the plan, and be open to the possibility that you don't already know what you need to know. Even when I'm coming to a conversation with the idea that I've got to inform somebody of something, it's really helpful to be open to the possibility that they've got something to inform me about as well.
Yeah. It sounds like you're describing active listening. That you're talking about a conversation between two people that's not just you saying something and me over here thinking, oh, what am I going to say in response? What's my response? Like, I'm really listening to what you have to say, because then that's going to guide and shepherd our conversation.
Yeah. Are you a person who, when somebody says their name, you're already thinking about what you're going to say, and therefore you didn't get their name?
I have been known to do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have tried to break that habit. I think I've had some success in breaking that habit. You're so intent, not you. One is so intent on making a first impression on this person you've never met. Like, the fact that you don't know their name is the first time you've ever met them. And you're thinking about me. How am I presenting myself? And it's so embarrassing to be so concerned of how I'm going to present myself that I don't even catch the other person's name. And the simple act of remembering somebody's name goes a long way. People like that.
Yeah, absolutely. They do. And it shows that you care, and it shows that you paid attention, that you're saying, when you remember someone's name, you're saying, I see you, I am interested in you, and I want to get to know you more just by remembering someone's name.
Yeah.
what do you think? You swim in the world of literature and story. What
Mhm.
can we learn from literature, and what do we have for takeaways there as we're talking about like building relationships and like how have you seen great stories uh, and literature actually support that?
Yeah. So I've got a PhD in 17th century poetry, and that was a good
You are
way
the
to.
first person I've met today that has a PhD in 17th
Yeah,
century
really?
poetry. Yes,
Yeah, you should get out more.
I should.
Uh, the uh, and that was a good way to spend 5 or 6 years, reading
Mhm.
what I wanted to read and writing about it and stuff. But also when I became a a non-academic writer, what I was really drawing on more, I mean, it certainly didn't hurt to get a PhD in English, right? Although there were some things I had to unlearn in order to be a
Mhm.
writer. Um, but what I was really drawing on were the stories that I got growing up.
Mm.
And I wasn't. I mean, what I'm really talking about is the people in my family who told stories. Uh,
Really?
oh yeah, just
Yeah.
really. I mean, I developed very early the habit of when something happens, how is this going to? How do I articulate this unusual thing that just happened at supper tonight or
Mm.
on Sunday when the larger family gets together. So shaping experience in the story was always a part of what how I interacted with people in the world. And by the way, I think there are some dangers to that,
Mm.
right? I mean, when you convert experience into language, you lock it down in a way that sometimes it's harder to really make additional sense of it beyond whatever sense you made of it when you first locked it down in language.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Carr, Mary Carr talks about. Sorry, I was looking over to get the name of the book off
Yes.
the Art of Memoir. She talks about the
Okay.
memories that you've told stories about sometimes get a little bit closed off.
Hmm.
Um, and I just mentioned that by way of a reminder. What we started with was the idea that you in conversation you try to open yourself up.
Hmm.
And so I guess I'm just saying in that storytelling thing that we
Hmm.
as a family we're doing all the time, there actually are some dangers in that, but the
Hmm.
benefits are really great. And there's something about that culture of storytelling. And I'm not trying to give the impression that it wasn't, once upon a time. You go to those, the
Hmm.
storytelling competitions that are just, fabulous and elaborate. I'm just talking about actually saying, here's what happened to me today. I
Yes.
saw a three-legged dog or whatever.
Yes.
That habit of storytelling also makes me more alert, has always made me more alert to what's actually
Hmm.
going on around me.
Hmm. Hmm.
And noticing that this is actually a world of wonders that we live in
Yeah.
because,
Yeah. Yeah.
the anecdotes might have different points, different anecdotes have a different point, but every anecdote has this point, and that is what a
Hmm.
world we live in.
Mm. I love
And
that.
so, there's a connection between um, storytelling back and forth, like you and I are
Hmm.
doing, and just cultivating wonder and interest in the
Hmm.
world.
Hmm. Do you find that, as you then grew up, you were a kid that loved these stories. You're thinking through, oh man, I've got a story to tell tonight at the dinner
Mhm.
table. Did you find that like as you grew up and then you had your own family that you were doing that to tell this story to your kids at the table? And then did you notice that they kind of started doing the same thing? What did that look
Yeah,
like for you?
yeah. My kids are really gifted storytellers because of that habit that we
Hmm.
develop. Every one of them is can tell a good story and can tell a funny story. And when we get together, you know, most of them are actually all of them are out of the house, and there's six of them, and they're kind of
Hmm.
all over the place. And when we all get together, it's just let me tell you what I saw.
It's
It's
story time.
it's really
How
fun.
do you foster that sense of wonder, that beauty, like that awareness of beauty? Let's say if you've got kiddos that are in that elementary school
Yeah.
age, how would a parent that has kids at that age foster that awareness and wonder?
Well, so two things I'd like to say about that. One is as you tell stories of old family stories, about the time cousin Todd picked up the roadkill alligator, or the time that the buzzard got in the car with
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Bill. You are communicating to your children. You're a part of a story. This story's been going on, and now it's your story. Now you're part of this story, and you have something to add too. I mean, I think that's the really a big thing that I think maybe I'm never going to write a parenting book because I don't consider myself an expert. But I think that's one thing we did right was conveying to them there's a story. We've got all kinds of good stories in this family.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, our family's not unique in having good stories. Everybody's family has good stories and
Yes.
some sad stories and all kinds of stories. And you have entered into that, and now you're carrying that on. And and I think as far as fostering wonder, I think I'm just going to go back to what I said before. When you are expecting, when you are taking in the world as a storyteller, you're very much attuned to the marvels of the world, right? We're always looking for. We all think we know what to expect from the world, and we're always wrong. and so there are ways of dealing with that cognitive dissonance, and some of them are very unhealthy. One of the healthy ways is saying, that was amazing. I did not expect that to happen. Let me tell you about it. And there's real value in that. I mean, if you think about the, I had never put this into words before, but I think just from this conversation, conversations reveal things for a storyteller. The unexpected and possibly even the tragic. And I don't want to insufficiently pay attention to the tragic things that happen in life. But let's start with the unexpected. There is people for whom the unexpected just sends them off the ledge. I mean, it's like I've got my idea of how the world's supposed to work. The world didn't work that way.
Therefore, the world is terrible. And
therefore, that's right. Yeah. And it's such a short step from I expect this to I deserve this to when I don't get it, it's somebody else's fault. For the storyteller, whatever else happens, when there's something unexpected, I've got a story. And I get in the habit of framing that story in a larger story that hopefully is truer than the one that the world is telling. And I think there's really, incredible value in that. And I'd never really thought of it I never thought of storytelling as an antidote to the kind of the self-absorption of being angry when the world doesn't work out the way you expected it to. I never made that connection until just now. Well, and I barely made it, right? Because we had
you
that pause.
You did it. And it makes so much sense, because if I go through a surprising or unexpected or terrible circumstance and I go through it all by myself, I might have survived it. But then when I'm at the point of being able to tell a story about it and to share that experience with someone else, it means that I've come through it enough to be able to verbalize it. And then someone else gets that experience too, where before it would have just been me in my own corner. And then I'm sharing this experience with someone else, and then they take their own life experiences and perspectives and their own stories and integrate them together in a way that wouldn't have existed before. It sounds like art.
Yeah, right. No, I do think the habit of telling stories prepares you to, again, without in any way diminishing the pain of painful things. As you said, when you tell the story and articulate it to other people, that helps them to bear the burden with you. And I think it's just the habit of storytelling gets you there a little faster. Right.
I love it. Just the habit of storytelling gets you there a little faster. That's such a great way to put it. I love it.
Good.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You referenced this a little bit, that story is this ongoing conversation, and that literature is this ongoing conversation. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I guess I'll start here. There are different ways, I guess the package has different places you can rip it open, but I guess I'll start with the idea of originality, which is a value in literature. It's not, I hope it's not the first value of
Me
literature.
too.
Yeah. And so I have somehow, and maybe this is because maybe this is where my PhD in literature was very helpful. I came to understand, thankfully, before I started, being a non-academic writer, I came to understand that it's all a conversation. Like you're always in conversation with the predecessors, and there aren't that many more stories, right? There aren't there's just a finite number of stories that play out in different ways, but they're infinite when you consider there are different characters who play out those stories and with different motivations and different settings and all that kind of stuff. And so the originality, all I can do, the only way I can write anything original is to add on to what's gone before, right? That I can't create something out of nothing. And so it's always been helpful for me. And also when I teach literature, when I'm asking students, I mean, it's been a long time since I asked somebody to write an essay about literature, but when I did, it was, hey, there's been a conversation going on about Paradise Lost since 1667, and you may or may not have anything original to say about this. But there's a conversation, and you're invited into the conversation, and you have something to add. Doesn't mean you're the first person ever to say it, but you have something to add to this conversation. And that seemed to help students, make sense of what they were doing in the process of writing an essay about a poem that people have been writing essays about for hundreds of years. And so and I think what you find is once you lean into and rest in the fact that there's a tradition that I'm participating in, and we get to participate in, right? You don't it's not like you earn the right to participate in the tradition. You're in the tradition. When you read Paradise Lost or Shakespeare or any of it, you're in the conversation. And you didn't earn the right. I mean, I guess you earned the right by reading it.
Yes.
And I did have plenty of students trying to enter the conversation without reading it, but and
fantastic.
so they and I think what you find is you get to be more original than you think. When you stop trying to be original, when you just say, here's what I've seen with my eyeballs.
I love that.
Yeah. And so that's what you have to add to the tradition, by the way, whether you are just in class discussion or whether you're writing an essay or whether you're writing new literature. And so, I think my Wilderking stories feel original. I mean, in some ways they're obviously derivative, right? There's a Bible story. Maybe we don't have to tell which Bible story it is, but there's spoiler. Okay, it's David, and and he, the things that happened to Aiden are a lot of things that happened to David, and but I think I was the first person to tell that story in a swamp, and to me it doesn't feel original at all. There isn't a single place in the Wilderking stories that doesn't exist somewhere in Georgia or Florida. Like every setting is just me remembering that setting and describing it, right? But to you, maybe it feels original because you've never been to these swamps. Maybe you have, I don't know. But but and you've never seen these stories play out in that setting. And so it feels original to the reader. Doesn't feel original to me. Every joke in that 3-book series, I probably got from somebody else. Probably my Uncle Dan with a lot of them, but
Everyone needs an Uncle Dan,
that's
man.
right.
As you are talking about this, I'm thinking about how a lot of our watchers and listeners are like mentors and parents and people that care
Yeah.
about people, right? And
Uh-huh.
sometimes when you're in that, you think, man, I really care, but I don't feel like I have anything to actually share. You know,
Hmm.
that I'm
Hmm.
not the person coming up with original life-changing thoughts. And
Yeah.
so what I hear you talking about and verbalizing is that we are a part of this holy heritage, this conversation that's been going on, and we take what's already been there and then add our own personal experience on top of it,
Mhm.
and that's where life change happens.
Yeah.
Is that a bit of
There we
what
go.
would you
Yeah.
agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I love
And
that.
also, since we're talking about originality and art and storytelling, it's been my observation that let's just pretend I'm making up these statistics. Um, the Wilderking stories are 90% um, unoriginal
Mm-hmm.
and 10% of something I added.
Yeah.
It's really gratifying to know that what people pay attention to is that 10%. That
Mm.
whatever you add to the tradition,
Yep.
um, it really is just I know it's the tip of the iceberg, but it's also what people really appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
you couldn't do it without all the,
Mm-hmm.
you can't put the icing on the cake without the cake. There you go. There's our
Yeah.
analogy, right?
Yeah.
There's a cake. The cake was given to you.
Yeah.
Best you can hope for is to put a little icing on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Your
And
own.
but that's what the world needs from you.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
is that little bit of icing. And in your mind, it's like, boy, this isn't original. I've only got this much that's original, but that's what people need from you is that little
Yeah.
bit that you do have to add to this
Mm-hmm.
tradition. By the way, I don't want anybody being especially original with advice to me.
True.
You know, if I'm hurting, if I am lost, if I've lost my way and I need some kind of advice,
Hmm.
please don't give me any original advice.
Yeah. Yeah. We
Just,
want the stuff that has
just
worked
tell me
in
the
other
old
people's
story
lives.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, well, what would that look like, around our kitchen table to tell a story and to invite, my 12-year-old and 10-year-old and 8-year-old to be a part of that telling the story. And I
Mhm.
love, just like you're talking about, like we have those family stories that they've heard
Mhm.
and they know. And I'm always fascinated to hear them retell it because they
Yeah.
do it with their own
Uh,
style and flair
yeah.
and plagiarism, and it's beautiful. Okay, so I overheard you talking about names, like identity and who we are,
Uh-huh.
and you said something pretty profound. You said we don't give ourselves our own names. Can you talk about like what does that look like in conversation?
Well, in conversation, I mean, we're always, yeah, we don't give ourselves our own names. By the way,
Mhm.
speaking of family stories, my grandfather said he did give himself his own name. He said that his parents, instead of naming him, waited till he could talk and then asked him what he wanted to be named.
No
I mean, I think
way.
he's lying. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
he's a
90,
storyteller.
99.5% sure he was lying
I
about
love
that.
it, but I love
Yeah.
that's his take on
That's the kind of story
it.
my granddad told all the time. And
Yeah.
they said they just called him Abe Jr. till he could talk. And then when they asked him what he would name, he said, Abe Jr.'s fine. So uh anyway, you don't give yourself your own name. You're always looking and this is the idea that sort of where my book, The Charlotte's Boy, started,
Mm,
is to wonder, to sort of put myself in a situation of a boy who doesn't know who he is or where he came from, and
mm,
the only person who can tell him is a liar.
mm,
And so the first line of that book is I don't remember one thing about the day I was born.
mm,
And then the observation is, and neither does anybody else. Like we
mhm.
have to hear from somebody else. I think I was born in Warner Robins, Georgia. I don't remember anything about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for that matter, I guess I think DeLacy and Betsy Rogers were my parents. You know, pretty sure that's true, but I'm
Yes.
having to take it on faith.
Uh-huh.
um,
Yes.
and and so we're always, and this isn't this isn't a bug, it's a feature. We're always looking
Mhm,
around we're not looking deep within to know who we are. We're
mhm,
kind of looking around to see, as people tell us, what we belong to, we begin to know who we are.
mhm.
And by the way, that's really hard for some people who don't who don't have somebody speaking, kindness into as they sort of tell them who they are, intentionally or unintentionally. You may not be around kind people. And so it's so important for us to speak the truth and love to one another about who we are. And I mentioned before we started recording, I went to see David Brooks speak
Yes.
a couple of nights ago, and he was talking about the importance of, as we pay attention, as we listen with curiosity, as we lean into other people's stories, as we care what hometown they came from, they feel like a person who is a person of value, a person who's interesting, a person who and it's not a you're not blowing smoke. Like, people are interesting. They all are. Everybody is.
Absolutely. Yes.
And when you stop putting people into categories and stereotypes, the only way you can think of somebody as uninteresting is to put them in some sort of stereotype, to think, I've already got that person figured out. I don't need to talk to them. I don't need to be interested and curious. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? People do become less interesting when you're not interested in who they are.
Right.
They just represent some category.
Yeah.
So David Brooks talked about the importance of paying attention, being interested in what other people have to say, not spending so much time thinking, what am I going to say next? And in doing that, he didn't use this language, but you're kind of giving them a name.
Yeah. Yeah. Telling them who they are, giving them a name, giving a different reflection of that identity that they're forming.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can be such a gift to people. Again, when you're doing that in kindness, instead of, we're going to have an interaction in which I demonstrate that I'm cooler than you, better than you, smarter than you, whatever. And you said you've read David Brooks's most recent book, but
which, if you haven't read it yet, it's How to Know a Person, which is just phenomenal. Yeah, go get it.
Good. And so he talks about Winston Churchill's mother met two different prime ministers, and I can't remember their names. British prime minister names all run together for me. But
yes.
One of them, she met with him. She was so impressed, and she left and said, "That's the smartest person I've ever met." And then when she met another one, she said, essentially, he made me feel like the smartest person he had ever met.
Yeah. I love that story. That was the story that stood out to me when I read his book too. And I just took it. I was like, oh my goodness, I want to be that second prime minister who makes people feel like they are the most interesting, smartest people in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy either way, right? Whether you belittle somebody or whether you dig into what's actually interesting about them, you draw things out of people, and it's so tempting, and it really is hard to resist the temptation in a conversation to focus on self-presentation. What is this person going to think about me? And the truth is, if you can be genuinely interested in them, what they think about you is going to take care of itself. Yeah. And they might miss the fact that you're as smart as you are. Right? Maybe they won't realize just, how brilliant Mandy is. And yet, but still, what they'll think about you is better than Mandy's super smart.
I agree with that. I do agree. Yeah. How do you cultivate that care yourself, that active listening yourself, where you're able to put aside your own view of yourself to really focus on someone else? Because it's easier said than done for me.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'm gonna get theological for just a minute, then we'll move on to
please do.
else. Okay. If I didn't think I was justified by Jesus, I would spend all my energy trying to justify myself. And I don't know how people, and by the way, I forget that I'm justified by Jesus, and therefore I justify myself sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Oh, no, a lot of the time,
Yes.
right? And I demonstrate all the things that I need, the glory I need,
Mm-hmm.
um, that need to be for somebody to say, well done,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's covered.
Mm-hmm.
And when I forget, I spend a lot of my time making sure people around me think it's the things I'm doing are well done.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I don't know, I forget all the time, right? And therefore even in this conversation, I've caught myself trying to come across as smarter than I am. It's embarrassing, but at least I have that to recenter, to say, oh, wait, yes,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't matter.
Going back
And
to
my
it.
efforts to achieve glory by impressing people
Mm-hmm.
is a pretty shabby version of glory. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a real glory um, that I have to look forward to,
Mm-hmm.
even if Mandy doesn't think I'm the smartest person she's ever met. And so the question is, how do you,
Yeah,
stay
how
curious about
like what
other
does it look
people?
like to set that aside?
Yeah,
And I hear
yeah,
you saying, like, anchor yourself in what is true, which is that you're
yeah,
justified, so you don't have to justify yourself to someone else.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, so there's the theology.
Yes.
And I think the next one's theological too. It's just maybe not quite as direct. I don't know what the Bible verse is for the
Hmm.
next one. People are just interesting.
Yeah.
They just actually are.
Yeah.
And when um, my world doesn't expand when I devote my conversational time to demonstrating to you how awesome I am. My
Mm.
world does expand when I talk to you and discover that, I don't know, learn something about the world, about
For sure.
you.
Yeah.
Um, and so as once you start the habit of being interested in other people,
Hmm.
it kind of grows. It's once you learn, oh yeah, people actually are interesting. It's
Yeah.
easier it's more fulfilling and rewarding to pay
Yeah.
attention to them. And then sometimes I forget, and I
Hmm. Hmm.
instead try to impress people.
Yeah, it's kind of like a treasure hunt where, if you sit down next to someone that you don't know and then you're thinking like what's inside this awesome person that I can discover and find
Yeah.
out that's really going to be intriguing or spark the
Mhm.
next conversation. It reminds me
Mhm.
of what C.S. Lewis said when he said that we've never spoken to a mere mortal,
Yeah. There are no
that
ordinary people.
there are no ordinary people, and that
Mhm.
here I am speaking to Jonathan, the immortal, and
Yeah.
that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. This goes up and down, but sometimes I really go on a tear of just talking to strangers and finding,
Hmm.
asking questions about, what's something that happens in your hometown that doesn't happen at other places, or what's something about your job that would surprise me.
Hmm.
Um, and it's an unusual person who doesn't have something interesting to say when you ask questions
Hmm.
like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What's the most interesting thing in your hometown that would surprise us, Jonathan?
I guess it would be that when I was born in 1969,
Hmm.
nobody's parents had been born in Warner Robins. So it was a whole
Oh.
town. It was a new town.
Hmm.
And like there wasn't even a place called Warner Robins until World War II. And so
Okay.
everybody's parents were from somewhere else. Like people in
Hmm.
my generation, literally everybody's parents were from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that makes for some interesting dynamics.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
I would.
and it was a town where all those people who came to town, because there was an Air Force base there, they went from being subsistence farmers, to being suddenly middle class. And
Hmm.
that's also an interesting dynamic. And so those are a
Hmm.
couple interesting things about my hometown.
Absolutely. I love
Yeah.
it. I love it.
And
Okay.
you have the Alamo, so
Yes, it's true. We've got the Alamo, we've got Fiesta, we've got the Riverwalk.
yeah, I like the Riverwalk. It's nice.
Yeah, it's a good spot.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things, let me think through like the best way to phrase this question, but I'm curious. I want to learn from you in this way. A lot of times, as you're writing, as you're hosting these conversations too on your podcast, but as you're writing, like you put things in a way that makes your reader want to question things because you've got your character who's also like bumping into hard things that they've got to figure out. And
Uh-huh.
and then they're working through the answers, in the midst of the story. So less story development and writing and more relationally. Is it possible to inspire that same curiosity in your relationships around the kitchen table, around the coffee at the coffee shop, like opportunities that will foster somebody else asking hard questions, battling through, working through those answers in a way that's not in Cornwald?
Yeah, it's that's an interesting question. And I think we're gonna have to go into do as I say and not as I do
Yeah.
mode here,
Yeah, let's do it.
Um, I think the just modeling the asking of interesting questions
Hmm.
um, helps.
Hmm.
Asking uncomfortable questions, and again, this is with people that you have a relationship with, not
For sure.
strangers.
Yeah.
And now I'm going right back to David Brooks. It's all fresh because I just
Yes.
heard him speak. But he has a series of questions. Now I can't remember. I'm having trouble remembering what his so he has some questions that get strangers talking, and that
Hmm.
makes them feel seen and interesting. And then he
Hmm.
has some questions that really, when you're in a relationship with somebody, a question like,
Yeah.
what would you do if you were not afraid? That's a
Hmm.
good one.
Yeah.
And one that I'd be afraid to answer.
Yeah.
you know
And I wonder if a way to start that in a conversation would be to model it, like you're saying. So maybe I'd be willing to go out and share, well, here's what I would do if I weren't afraid. How about you? And so
Yeah.
I'm kind of showing that it's a safe concept to talk about.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. You could also get burned doing that.
It's true. It's
Yeah.
true.
So
And
how
therein
do you
lies the
deal with that
risk.
when you get burned, when you're open
Mm.
and you don't get openness back?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
how do you make sense of that?
For me personally, it's going back to what you were talking about, that reminder of who I am,
Hmm.
that God is inviting me to ask questions and giving me the
Hmm.
opportunity to be curious, and I'm not responsible for the response.
Yeah.
That it's and that maybe that person will come to a conclusion later, years down the road,
Yeah.
that it's just that little seed
Yeah.
that gets
Your
planted. But
business is the
yeah.
sowing, not the harvest.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it still stings. But
Yeah.
just but I think going back to the wisdom of what you were talking about, that oh wait, this is not about me in this
Hmm.
situation. It's about, I remind myself of my position and then move forward.
Hmm.
Hmm. How about for you? What does that look like if somebody shuts down a conversation or even slams it back really fast?
To tell you the truth, in this is why I'm saying do as I say and not as I do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm as likely to be the one shutting down that conversation as the one, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
I mean, I
Yeah.
certainly have been in situations where I thought we were ready to sort of be honest and we
Hmm.
weren't. And
Sure.
I tend to, back
Hmm.
off and say, I'm sorry,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but I'm also just as likely to, in response to to a hard question,
Hmm.
come out with some anecdote, because
Hmm.
this, I mean, I was mentioning this, I touched on this earlier. Sometimes the storytelling is a way to avoid.
Yes.
I've already
Yes.
I've got a sad story told for laughs here for you.
Yes.
Instead of being perfectly honest,
Mm.
I've got this story queued up
Hmm.
that, and so that's I would say I have a somewhat ambiguous relationship
Hmm.
with story because it's also
Yeah.
the way I personally
Yes.
avoid hard conversations sometimes.
Mm. Yeah.
And the person, if it's not a person who knows me real well,
Hmm.
they feel like they're getting something from the conversation, possibly
Oh,
because they got
yeah.
a funny story.
Yes.
My wife has heard all the sad stories told for laughs she wants, and she doesn't want anymore.
Hmm. Hmm. And she
And
knows you well enough to
yeah,
know, oh, let's follow that thread to
yeah,
get to the
yeah.
answer.
It's like, are you
Mm.
sure that story's funny? Because that may not be funny.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it true that our greatest strengths are also our greatest weaknesses? That
Yeah.
here you are the master storyteller, and then sometimes it's really the easier option to jump into a hard conversation by telling a story and then let it flow to somebody else.
Yeah.
That's actually how I got into questions. I hated being asked questions. I hated
Hmm.
being in conversation. And I
Uh,
discovered that if I asked the question first, it got somebody else talking. And so I totally resonate with that. Like, what does it look
yeah.
like? We've, I wonder, as mentors, as people that are loving other people, we think through what is my greatest strength? What would that look like if I'm
Uh-huh.
using it as a weakness? Or what does it look like when I'm allowing it to be the thing it shouldn't be? And
Mhm.
instead nudge it toward that strength.
Yeah.
I have been so blessed and grateful to have this conversation with you. How do we keep connected with you?
Oh, well, kind of everything I do is sort of funneled through thehabit.co.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Thehabit.co.
yeah, not com. I don't know what happens if you go to thehabit.com, but thehabit.co is me.
Yes.
And that's the first step there is just sign up for the weekly letter. I send out a letter every Tuesday called The Habit Weekly. And I'm always talking about something related to writing broadly defined, right? It might be word histories, or it might be, dealing with the inner critic, it might be commas, who knows? And so that's the best starting point, for staying in touch with me and with what I'm up to. And when I teach a new class, it's always announced there. When I put on a retreat, it's announced there. And then, I run the Habit membership for writers. And so that's a place where writers, I think a lot of times they come because I'm teaching a class. There's some instruction they're looking to get from me, but they stick around because of it's an amazing community of writers who just give each other more courage. And it's really a great place. A lot of good conversation there.
Thank you for sharing with us about story and about vulnerability and about literature and what we can learn. And I love the reminder that we're simply entering into that conversation that's been going on for so long and adding that uniquely, divinely placed conversation on top of it.
Yeah, great. All right, thanks, Mandy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.